Hi, my name is Alex and I work for an organisation called GAP. Today we'll be talking about misinformation, disinformation, how to recognise it and what you can do about it. So we're going to start with a quick quiz. I'm going to say a sentence. I want you to stand up if you think that it's true and remain seated if you think that it's false. I'll give you about 10 seconds to make your decision. Ready? Here's number one. Nearly half the people in Ireland get their news from social media. 10 seconds. So this one's true. About 47% of people in Ireland get some or all of their news from social media. Number two. Most Irish teenagers can recognise an incorrect statement when they read it. So this one's actually false. Only about 1 in 5 Irish teenagers can recognise an untrue statement when they read it. All right, sentence number 3. Injecting people with disinfectant could be a cure for COVID-19. Okay, this one's completely false. Everyone sit down again. Now, that last statement might have sounded a little bit wacky. Does anybody recognise where it came from? I'll give you about 5 seconds to shout out the answer. Who said this originally? It was this guy.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
Well, what's the problem with someone in power saying things like this? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to discuss this question with the person next to you. When you see this timer run out, I'll be back. This video came out at a time when it was difficult to know whether this was true or not. COVID was a new phenomenon, people were locked down and afraid, and importantly, many people didn't know enough to make up their minds on the topic. It was also something that was repeated a lot online and in person, and maybe most importantly, it comes from a person in authority who we should be able to trust. So let's be charitable and imagine that President Trump, as he was speaking off the cuff in the moment, believed exactly what he was saying and was making an honest mistake. In this situation, we could say that this is an example of misinformation, when you say something that you believe is true, but actually it isn't true. Here's another more recent statement from President Trump. And for context, paracetamol is a drug that helps pregnant women with pain, which can be very intense when pregnant, and fevers, which can actually damage the health of their babies. Now imagine that you were pregnant and you heard about this statement on news or on social media. How would you feel? Would you take paracetamol if you had a headache? And I want you to talk to the person next to you, answer those questions and explain your thinking. You probably rightfully be concerned and maybe even afraid, and you may or may not take paracetamol if you felt sick. This prepared statement is factually incorrect, as it disagrees with all available scientific research which Trump's Department of Health would have had access to. So we could describe this as an example of disinformation, making a claim that you know is untrue, but making that claim anyway. Mis and disinformation is effective because it strongly affects people's emotions, making them feel afraid, concerned, or outraged. And these messages raise your emotions to try to get you to spread them further. And the algorithms that power social media, they love it. They love sensational, provocative content because we pay attention and we share it again and again and again, and we keep coming back for more. Let's take one more statement from President Trump, and this time again I want you to stand if you think it's true or remain seated if you think it's false. Here it is. So this one actually has some truth to it. In fact, estimates for bird deaths from wind turbines in the US range from approximately 234,000 to 328,000 each year. But let's look into it just a little bit more closely. Now, here are 4 other facts that are related to the last one. For each of these facts, do they support or argue against wind turbines? And are they useful to help you make up your mind about wind turbines? Mis and disinformation is successful when it combines stereotypes, emotions, and selectively chosen facts into a story that sounds truthful. We're going to look at some examples of these stories later, but before we do, here's one more fact. And what does it help us understand about President Trump's statements about wind power? So it seems like Trump's distaste for wind turbines isn't actually based on fact. It's kind of almost as if he disliked them to start with and is now choosing facts that support his opinion. Now, there may, of course, be other reasons why he dislikes wind power, but this could be one factor. So what's the point of mis and disinformation, and who else might be spreading it? The aim of disinformation is to spread confusion among the general population. That's it. There are people out there who want you to be confused. If you're confused, you as a citizen aren't making rational decisions, and that offers people opportunities to take advantage of you. Or if you're earnestly repeating their disinformation as something you believe, you're adding to other people's confusion, and the sum total of confusion grows. Here are some people who might be responsible for spreading mis and disinformation. Choose one of these people and discuss why would they want to spread misinformation and why would they want you to be confused. Okay, taking those one by one. A country is less competitive if its people are distracted and fighting among themselves. This might cause a population to vote against their national interests, which would benefit a rival country. And in this situation, their leaders might be weaker and can't govern as effectively. And if countries themselves are fighting between each other, for example, between EU member states, then that bloc is less cohesive and less competitive with other countries. Companies generally want to increase their profits by selling more of their products, and they fear actions that limit their ability to do so. For example, tobacco companies use misinformation to delay political action for years on smoking laws, and oil companies are using exactly the same playbook today. If you want to know more about greenwashing, check out our greenwashing video from a previous Climate and Nature Summit. Politicians, especially those on the far right, could take advantage of confusion to strengthen their own position. For example, if their people are divided and disagreeing amongst themselves, then they're not united against that politician. Social media influencers, for example, might be incentivized to do so, either for money or for likes, which can also equate to money. And people who are genuinely passionate about an issue might share misinformation just because they don't know that it's untrue. Maybe they mean well, but they haven't checked their sources, they haven't checked their facts. Or they might be deliberately sharing lies to try to convince you with emotionally powerful arguments that they know might be untrue. But just because somebody cares about a topic doesn't mean they have other people's best interests at heart. For example, people on the far right of politics want to build support for policy positions that are often based on intolerance for marginalised communities such as immigrants or the LGBTQ+ community. And confusion and suspicion boost this intolerance and make their extreme positions seem more normal. If you can get people to disagree about which bathroom trans women should use, for example, then they're not united in solidarity together with the trans community, and this is a win for the far right. So, what are some clues that we're looking at mis or disinformation? We're going to work through a few with examples. The first thing that we need to understand is, what are they actually saying? This hunk here is composer Claude Debussy, and he's credited with saying, "Music is the space between the notes." And in the same way, misinformation is often about telling stories inside the words that people are saying. But let's take an example to illustrate. One very common story we hear in a lot of online conversations about migration is called the Great Replacement Theory. Now, this is the false idea found in many countries that native, or specifically white, people of Europe or America are being deliberately replaced by non-white immigrants, often Arabs or Muslim people, and that this is being arranged by a group of clandestine powerful elites. Now, although this theory has absolutely no basis in truth, it does have real-world consequences when people believe this story, which we'll explore in a minute. This is Conor McGregor in conversation with Tucker Carlson, an American right-wing commentator, articulating a version of this story. And this interview was recorded when McGregor was still considering a run for president of Ireland.
So I come here to Dublin, your biggest city, and not one advertisement on any public space has Irish people in it.
Yeah.
And it's clearly part of the same propaganda campaign.
Yeah.
Like, make white people hate themselves, make white people feel ashamed to be white people are criminals. It's like, okay, but why would they, who's doing that to you and why? Like, what is that?
I feel since the turn of the crash, our government elite have been accosted into full-time globalist traders of Ireland. And they take their orders from above. And it is not even them. They are being ordered, and the orders are coming down onto the people, and the people have no say. We need amendments to the Constitution. We need to remove this tight grip that the political elite have over the public. And that is it. And that is our goal here eventually.
Let's take a closer look at their exact words. Is there any evidence for the things that they're saying? And what are the stories behind their words? What are they referencing that they're not directly saying? For example, when Carlson says, "Not one advertisement in any public space has Irish people on it." Now, the evidence could be that he's checked every single advertisement in Dublin. I don't think he's done that. So it's either an exaggeration or a complete fabrication. And the implication of his words is that Irish people are white, and if you are not white, then you are not Irish. Now, I want you to do the same for these quotes. What's the evidence, and what are they implying? taking those one by one, where he says it's part of a propaganda campaign to make white people hate themselves, make white people be ashamed to be white, like white people are criminals. Now, there's no evidence at all that someone is trying to make white people ashamed of their identities, but he's alleging it here. And watch how he escalates from white people aren't in ads to white people are being made to feel ashamed of themselves to white people are being portrayed as criminals. It's powerful stuff. When McGregor says, since the turn of the crash, our government elite have been accosted into full-time globalist traitors of Ireland, again, there's no real evidence offered. But McGregor links migration to a time in recent memory when people were really genuinely angry at the government for mishandling the economy and causing them serious hardship. And he describes the government as traitors, which is very powerful language, and it suggests that the actions aren't in the best interests of the Irish citizens. When he says the government are being ordered and the orders are coming down to the people, now there's possibly a little evidence for this in a way. After the crash in 2008, some very unpopular economic measures were recommended to the government by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the European Union. However, those measures were related to the economy and had very little to do with the government's policy on migration. Maybe you can start to see how opinion and fact and fiction are starting to be blended in this version of the Great Replacement story. But what is it that gives these stories their power? Well, a lot of misinformation relies on telling and retelling stories that have proved effective in the past. And by effective, I kind of mean that people are moved enough or, motivated enough to share it again and again and again, to retell that story, to repost that tweet. Sometimes these stories are powerful because they build on existing stereotypes and ideas that we've heard a lot in the past. So they tend to be able to imply a lot, but without saying very much at all. Part of the reason that the Great Replacement story is powerful is because it combines a lot of other powerful mini stories, some of which have a grain of truth, while others speak to individual and cultural beliefs and prejudices. So here's an example. The Great Replacement story contains ideas like, we can't trust politicians. We've been left behind by some recent economic changes in our country. There are more kinds of people in the country than there were in the past. People from other cultures can't be trusted. And another group, migrants here, are responsible for our problems. Now, you could argue that the first three of these are, to one degree or another, truthful. But the last statements are where they move from real-world situations into manipulating your beliefs or prejudices or fears. And the consequences of this story are real. So similar stories were used to build sentiment against the Jewish people in Europe before World War II, for example. The Great Replacement story has been used to justify attacks on minority groups, like the man who killed 51 people in a mosque in New Zealand in 2019, or another man who murdered 10 people in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York in 2022. Here's another related story we hear about migration. And can you talk to the person next to you and break this down into other mini stories? What other mini stories are contained in this story? Well, you might have mentioned some of these, that in Ireland there is a housing crisis. You might also mention that it's difficult for anyone at all to find places to live. You might have mentioned that many people are living in hotel accommodation. You might have also mentioned that the system of direct provision also allocates people to hotel accommodation. And then also in there is this idea that limited resources such as housing should be given to Irish people instead of people from foreign countries. The first four of those are based in reality, but the fifth is very much an opinion. And it's also an opinion that sounds quite intolerant or even racist when you come out with it by itself, while this phrase Ireland is full is a little bit more palatable and a little bit more persuasive. But just like the Great Replacement story, Ireland is full story manages to combine facts and feelings into a story that can direct anger towards migrants. Now, I've already highlighted that one of the aims of disinformation is to heighten your emotions, to make you feel angry or incredulous or even afraid. For example, in that last video, both Carson and McGregor want you to feel unsafe or expendable or angry at other people. But let's take a look at another example. In 2023, a WhatsApp voice note was being shared about a school in Skibbereen where a student identified as a cat. Here's some of the voice note as reported by the Irish Mirror. What emotion is this trying to make you feel, and what's the story behind this? So they're probably trying to make you feel a sense of disbelief, as if this whole thing is ridiculous. And actually it is. The school released a statement that this was entirely false. But I think that the story behind this is that young people with non-traditional gender identities are themselves ridiculous. And this story aims to undermine greater awareness of gender identity and also undermine the acceptance and support of schools for those who do not conform to those traditional male-female binary identities. And mocking other people is a really powerful way that disinformation spreads. Oh, it's just a joke, but we'll share it and it gets around. Now it's your turn to try to put it all together. Here's a post that was going around at the beginning of 2025 during a status red warning in Storm Owen. I want you to look at this and discuss with the person next to you, what does this post want you to feel? And what kind of stories are they telling here? The second video tries to make people link a sensible precaution, not going outside in a category red storm, to the kinds of lockdowns that prevented the spread of COVID in 2020 and 2021. Now, lockdown was genuinely a difficult time for many people for many different reasons, and once again, the image of empty Dublin streets is very persuasive. But by alleging that these lockdowns are the work of sinister forces controlling the government or the weather, this misinformation destabilises support for action on climate change and also builds support for other stories, such as the Great Replacement story, where our government are acting against us and following orders from shadowy global elites. So how do we detect misinformation? What can we do about it? I'm going to offer you a very quick tool to help you detect and respond to mis and disinformation. And you can remember it using the word SIFT, S-I-F-T. So, first things first. S is for stop. Check your emotions. Does it feel like you might be being manipulated? If so, there's a chance it could be misinformation. Also, when you're stopping, take a look at the person who posted this thing. Do you recognize them? Did you sign up to their feed, or are you being given this for some reason? And if you don't recognize them, you might need to investigate further. Which is what I is for. I is for investigate the source. Who posted this? Does it seem like a bot? Do they have a reason to want you to believe them? And can you find out anything about them at all? You could read around to find out who they are and whether they have a motivation to spread false information. F is for find better coverage. Has someone else reported on this in a different place, a more reliable source? Has someone debunked this claim? And it can be good to have some reliable sources for this. T, finally, is to trace claims back to their original source. If the poster claimed a fact, where did that fact come from? Has it been presented out of context? Is this a story that has a long history of being repeated? If there's an image, for example, can you use Google reverse image search to find out the origin of this image? So, what can you as students do in schools to combat mis and disinformation? The first thing you might do is just practice SIFT. The best way to not to be part of sharing misinformation is to just not share misinformation. Look critically at the things that you see before you consider sharing them. Is this really what you want to say to the world? Another thing you might do is call it out. You can report examples of mis and disinformation to the social media platforms where you see them. They all have policies around this, and theoretically they will do something about it. You might also educate yourself. We've really only scratched the surface here about different ways that people can try to manipulate you online. I encourage you to become more aware of the kinds of narratives that people are pushing. There's lots of different stories. What are those stories, and why do they want you to believe them? You could develop evidence-based responses to the claims that you hear most often. How about starting a misinformation book club? So this could be like a discussion group with other people in your class or in your year, and that every time you meet, you might look into something that's coming up on your feed and research how true it is. And while we're speaking of research, if you're doing something for schoolwork, why not research the topic of misinformation? How is it affecting the students in your school? What are they seeing and sharing themselves? And how might you counter it? I'd really, really love to see a piece of research that touched on that. So that's all for me. I'm going to leave you with a follow-on task. I want you to find a post that you think might be mis or disinformation. Use that SIFT tool to analyse it. You can use some of the sources linked here as reliable sources, and your teacher can find some examples in the notes that are next to this video. If you wanted to make a post, breaking it down and sharing it with us at Gap Ireland, and you can use the hashtag Climate and Nature Summit to share it with us as well. I hope you've benefited from this, and stay safe out there. Bye.